Hey, welcome back to another conversation here with Pastor Allen. We're excited to talk about kind of some things from your message this weekend, talking about God's grace. It's a good thing, right?
Yes,
it's an encouraging
very good thing.
Why don't you share just a little bit kind of about where you came to in this message and kind of what made you think through some of this?
Yeah, so this series we've been in 4 weeks. We've been talking about God's unchanging. He doesn't change his immutability.
Sure.
He's all powerful. God's all present. And you look at some of those high views of God, which my goal was, if people could really understand God more, we would desire to relate to him.
Yeah.
And what a difference it makes, those kind of things. But this next 4 weeks, we're sort of making a change to some of the things, characteristics of God, or what God possesses that we can actually possess in our own life as well. We're not unchanging, obviously, and we're not all powerful,
Sure.
even though we might want to be. So
Some of
I've
you
looked
think you
forward, James, in the series to this message,
Yeah.
probably more than any of the rest, because of what God's grace means individually to me personally, and then what it can mean to everyone else.
Yeah, I love this. You kind of opened up with this passage in Isaiah 30. Isaiah 30:18 says, "The Lord longs to be gracious to you."
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, it was hard for me to get the concept because I sort of, if you heard the message, I sort of started out. I grew up in a home where both my mom and dad were blue collar folks. They were in this culture that nothing is free. All right.
Sure.
You don't ever get a free lunch. You work what you get. You go out and you have a work ethic. And I appreciate the work ethic they instilled in me.
Sure.
But when I tried to accept the grace of Jesus, that was a completely different idea that was hard for me to embrace because I'm thinking there's something I have to do in order to get God's grace. And, it's
Sure.
a gift.
I think that's so hard sometimes because there is this thought of if I, do this work, I get paid a fair wage. If I, accomplish this thing, I get rewarded. If I get, if I get up in first place, I get a better trophy than second. And God's grace just kind of like crashes into some of that, and He gives it to anyone.
Yeah.
It seems unfair. And I think if we're honest sometimes,
Yeah.
because there is this selfishness in us that's like, I deserve this, right? I have earned this. I have worked for this. But man, God operates in a different economy than we do. And while obviously, working hard is a great principle, right? Like we're not saying like, don't try, right? Just don't do anything. It doesn't matter. No, things matter. What you do matters. The Bible's full of descriptions about people working toward a goal. But when it comes to grace and to salvation, it's really not a thing that we have to work for.
Yeah. And I go back all the way to my seminary days, and I had a whole entire class because my seminary professor believed that it's so counterculture to believe that God will give grace to those who are undeserving, and that we need to wrap our head around that and understand it. So I was in there for a whole semester just trying to get rid of my biases and understand God is so different from how we think, that He loves giving grace to those who are undeserving. And honestly, we think often that, He shouldn't give grace to that person. But when we look in the mirror, we're thankful that He does give grace to undeserving people.
It would not be good for us to say, oh, I wish this person didn't get grace, right?
Yes.
Because the reality is we all need it, right? So whether you're
true.
worse than your friend or not, ultimately, I'm thankful, and I think we all are. Number one, that God, His saving grace removes our guilt.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yes. So, it's sort of basic Christianity 101. It's where it all starts, right? We have to be saved from our sin, which causes guilt in our life.
Yeah.
And we can take 1,000 spiritual sedatives today. We can try to eliminate the guilt with drugs or alcohol or whatever. But ultimately, the only thing that's going to take care of our guilt once and for all is Jesus Christ, His blood on the cross, and His saving grace. And that hasn't changed, and it never will.
There's a lot of ways I think that we try to maybe even earn back some of that grace,
Sure.
almost as a way to repay it. And you mentioned kind of different ways that we sort of seek salvation by some different areas. And I thought that was interesting. So maybe share just a couple of those that you were thinking about.
Yeah, I think the big one I hear about today is often like salvation by subtraction is what I call it, where if I don't do this, and I don't do this, and I don't do this, then maybe if I don't do enough bad things, God will,
Sure.
somehow he'll love me. And, it's just a fallacy that never works because we're inherently bad, right? And then, I think this other idea of salvation by comparison, we often think that, well, the guy down the street who claims to be a Christian, I know how he lives. I've seen him out and do these things. I'm better than he is. So if I'm better than he is, and maybe God grades on a curve, I'll get in. I just want to get in.
Yeah.
But problem is, he's not the standard and I'm not the standard. God's the standard. And when we compare ourselves to God, then again, we need his grace.
Right. It all goes back to what your standard is, what the aim is.
Right.
When it's, the best that I can be, well, that's fine. But ultimately, that's not going to offer any salvation for any person, including yourself. So we do need that to remove our guilt. And I do think, too, that we have such a small view of grace, and by small, I don't mean just that it can save us. That's incredible, but small in that, like, I don't need that anymore. Like,
right.
I'm thankful for God's grace. It's amazing. We sing about that, lots of songs about that. But then it's like, I'm so glad I needed that. But really where you kind of push this message into, and I thought this was really good, is that it's something that we need every day. Right. This isn't a past thing. This is a now thing.
Yeah. So what I see often in the church today is basically that when we accept his saving grace, we think we've arrived. But that's not the destination. That's the beginning. And really, it's the beginning of his grace in our life. So he saves us by his grace. But then I've shared a couple other things about God's grace. There's several things we could share that I think helps us to understand we need God's grace every day, even as his children.
That's good. I was looking through some of the scriptures that you mentioned, and this one really stuck out, which was James 4:6. It says, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble.
Yes.
That's a posture that is difficult, I think, for us to kind of act out as humility. I don't know that it's ever been harder or easier, but I can't imagine that it's been maybe harder than it is now to be humble, because there's so many avenues for celebrity success. It used to be 80 years ago, famous people were, in a certain sector, right? You really had to be famous to be famous, right? But now, like, you can be famous in like 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Usually not for good things. Sometimes for, things that are not great. But I mean, you can become kind of that viral sensation. You could go do something crazy today and become famous for a minute.
Yeah.
And so I think humility is so difficult because we live in a world that really doesn't give, accolades to humility. Oh, they're so humble, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think as a parent, if we just brought it down to, I want my kids to have humility. I do not want them to have an attitude of entitlement. And, my son Timmy plays football, and so he was telling me, hey, Dad, I'm going to get to play some quarterback this week in the game. They got drilled, all right? And every time he got the ball, he got tackled, most of the time for a loss. And then he fumbled, and the other team made a touchdown. And I looked at Timmy on the sideline, and I knew here's a kid who has been humbled, So on the way home, I picked him up, and we talked about, I said, I think you're an incredible young man. I think God has a bright future for you. Yeah. But you got to understand that he gives grace to those of us who are humble. And tonight you've been humbled, but get back in the game, and do your best. And God will sustain you, and you can learn from this time in your life, and you can be a better team player, and you can be better. And I just thought, here's just an example that I can use, that God gives grace to the humble, and he doesn't honor the proud. Because I think his attitude, like mine can be, it can be pride. Oh, I'm quarterback, and I'm going to be decked out, and I'm great. Yeah. And, we love our kids. We hate to see them be humble, but times in life, those brokenness times in life teach us humility, which is going to be a success factor in our life.
That's good. And it makes me think, too, that, as we're talking about all these attributes of God, these things that he is, it gives us a solid foundation to fall back on. So I can be humbled. I can lose. I can make mistakes. I can try something and fail, right?
Absolutely.
We can, whether that's, sometimes we take risks that are good and we try something and it doesn't work out. Sometimes we just do dumb things and we sin and God humbles us, but he doesn't leave us alone, right? That's the beauty of all of this, is that these attributes build around each other, because it's not just that God is one thing or another. He's all of those things.
All those things.
Right. He's not just a thing and a thing. He's God. Yeah. He's all things and yet he's, it's almost mind-boggling when you you start thinking about it. But when I think about all those things, I'm reminded that, man, there's a foundation of strength that we can live on that for us, and then we can give grace to other people.
Absolutely. That's really key, I think, is that this attribute of God, his amazing grace, he deposits in our life, saves us, strengthens us, sustains us through difficult times. And then he basically says, hey, because you've inherited grace, you are to be gracious to other people.
Yeah.
And that is tough at times because, again, we often think, I don't know if they deserve grace or not. But I always have to think back, we were undeserving recipients of God's grace.
That's right. Colossians 2:6, it says, just as you've received Jesus as your Lord, continue to live in him.
Yes.
And I think so often we forget that just as you received it part. It's like, oh yeah, I've already received that. But it's a continuation, right? It's that process of another theological word, sanctification, right?
Yeah.
Becoming more like Jesus is not a one-stop thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not a one swipe of your debit card and I got Jesus. It's like, I'm good, right? It's like,
yeah.
No, it takes time. It takes time to love other people, and it takes time of not doing that well. One thing that I've tried to do with my kids that is really hard is to come and admit when I'm wrong to them. Mm-hmm. If I've wronged them, if I've said something, if I've acted out or, acted in anger.
Good.
I had to do that the other day. I was hungry, and they were hungry, and we were frustrated, and it was hot, and it's just yell. You just kind of yell. You're just like in the car, you're like, just stop talking.
Yeah.
And I had to come back later and say, hey, I set them down on the couch and said, I want to apologize to you. Mm-hmm. I said, I was really frustrated, and it's not really your fault. But I took it out on you, and we hugged each other. But I'm trying to model that for them so they see that in some way that it's okay to come back around and not be perfect. Mm-hmm. It's okay to not be okay because God is sufficient for us.
I really felt like that scripture that God is the potter and we're the clay. That's such a great picture of God that I think all of us, he's molding us, and shaping us. And it's not easy sometimes, but he is. And we're on the potter's wheel until he calls us home. And we're continual learning about his grace every day.
This week, over the last, 8 or 9 days, we've had our G3 pastors with us from all across the country. It's been an incredible experience. They're always such an incredible blessing to come. And, they come here for training and resources, and I feel like they give us more encouragement than we give them. I don't know.
They do.
But I love having them here. And one thing that I think about when those guys come is how different their experiences are, yet at the same time, how common so many of our experiences are in the hurt and the difficulty. They're from Africa and the Ivory Coast and the Middle East and all these places, yet there are people there who experience hurt, who experience loss, who have difficulty, who need grace, who need encouragement to deal with their guilt. And those are universal truths.
Yeah, the thing I learn every time about G3 pastors is their transparency of their dependence on God. I think for us in the States, we have this buffer about us when we worship. Sure. What will other people think about us? Or if we really get on fire for God, are we going to be a fanatic? We have all these things that keep us safe. And when I see these folks come, they're not safe. They are they know what God's done in their life, and God is just so real to them. They don't care. They don't care what I think. They don't care what you think. They care what God thinks. And that's a lesson for all of us, I think.
It is, and it's encouraging to see them to see them worship and talk to them. There's the same passion, right? Yeah. And for us, it's easy to truncate those things into different areas of our life. And
some of it really is God's gifted them in a different way. I mean, I was behind Pastor Jacob this week, and I just thought, man, that guy is so fluid when he's, our praise band was singing. He was like doing that, and I'm just a little trying to even bend like him, and I'm thinking, all right, I need to go to a chiropractor. How does he do that? But it's just a God-given gift. I'm thinking, gosh, I want that.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, they're incredible, and we're so glad to have them. And hopefully, you've gotten a chance. Some of you I know have been here some this week to see them, and it's incredible just what God's doing through Highlands Fellowship and through our partnerships with people all around the world. it's easy to feel like you're just doing one small thing, right, in your sort of circle of influence. And then weeks like this happen, and it's like God just kind of blows the roof off of your expectations. And it's incredible to see his grace for others. And I think it's such a fitting that this message kind of coincided with all of this happening, because his grace is that big. It is that available to others. So kind of to pull this all back together, what would you say to someone if you're watching this today and you're like, yeah, I think that I've experienced grace at some point in my life, but I just I'm not feeling it, I'm just kind of feeling stuck. I'm not feeling like God's really in it for me. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think we'll all come to a point in a time in our life where we wonder if God's grace is real to us. Sometimes we even doubt our salvation as Christians. The enemy loves that. But rest assured, if you have trusted in Jesus Christ, you're a part of his family. His grace is going to strengthen you and sustain you when you go through difficult times, when you're hurt, when certain things come your way that you're thinking, why should I encounter this? God, do you really care for me? And I was telling James before we shared a little bit about what we're going to talk with you about today, about a lady in our church who's an older lady. She goes to our chapel service. All I know is her name's Miss Vickers. And several weeks ago, she came up to me, and she just always smiling and just a servant's heart and always happy. And she said, Pastor, I want you to pray for me. I've been diagnosed with cancer. Wow. And we cried a little bit on each other's shoulder, and because, she said, but I'm ready to meet Jesus if he decides to call me home. And I watched her through her chemo and radiation, and she kept her attitude on Jesus, and she never got bitter and resentful. And this past week she came in and she said, well, I got news. And I didn't know, is she going home or is she staying with us for an extended time? And she said, I'm cancer free. Wow. And we praised the Lord together, and she said, I've learned so much about God's grace through this time in my life. And I thought, man, that's how I want to be. I don't know if I would be like that, sure. But I think that attitude of God's sustaining, strengthening grace is a game changer for us in the Christian life.
That's good. I hope this conversation was encouraging. That story, to me, is just a reminder that we can take those difficulties in our life and we can see them as something that God uses for us, or we can push them away. And so I hope that, man, if you're in a difficult place, know that we're praying for you. We're here for you. If you need something, please reach out to us. You can shoot us an email. You can visit our website, hf.church, and find all of our content and people you can talk with. You are not alone in this. We're in this together. So thank you for being here today. Pastor Allen, thanks for another great conversation. Right. And we'll be back next week as we continue this series.
Good.